The first folio. What the devil is that? Hello and welcome to Explore Shakespeare with me, Ant. The First Folio is a collection of 36 of Shakespeare's plays that was published in 1623, 7 years after his death in 1616. Now, it's not actually a complete works of Shakespeare because it doesn't actually include all of his plays. Some, for example, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, or The Two Noble Kinsmen, or Edward III, are actually missing from this publication. But it is incredibly significant because we have no earlier publications of 18 of his plays. Without the First Folio, we would not have Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, The Tempest, or Twelfth Night, or many others today. Now, the First Folio is incredibly significant for other reasons too. It's very different to modern versions of the plays. And by modern versions, I mean versions that were published in the centuries following Shakespeare's death. At that time, grammar and spelling was becoming formalised in English, and the plays were rewritten to become more grammatically correct, or to have their spelling standardised. Now, I personally believe that that takes something away from the plays. What the First Folio provides us is an insight into what Shakespeare's true intentions might have been for the characters, because it's a record of how the words may have been spoken at the time. It was compiled by two actors from Shakespeare's company, the King's Men, formerly known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Now, these two men were called John Hemmings, or John Hemming, and Henry Condell. These are very significant figures. Not only were these men actors and therefore understood the importance of faithfully reproducing Shakespeare's work as it was spoken, they were also very close friends of William Shakespeare. In fact, they were such close friends. In Shakespeare's will, they, along with the legendary contemporary actor Richard Burbage, were the only men that Shakespeare left money to so that they could buy mourning rings in his memory. It's also believed that John Hemming and Henry Condell both had sons they named William. But why is this relationship important? It's important because Shakespeare clearly trusted these two men, and they would almost certainly have wanted to do justice to his work. Shakespeare hadn't been interested in publishing written versions of his play. The real money was to be made in the theatre, and the words were written to be performed by actors. In fact, one way of looking at the difference between the First Folio and the modern versions is that the modern versions were written to be read, and the First Folio is much closer to what was written to be performed. Unlike earlier quarto publications, the publication of the First Folio was overseen by two men who had a keen interest to keep the plays faithful to William Shakespeare's true intentions. So how does the First Folio differ from later texts? Now, the modern texts were often altered for the sake of modern writing conventions. This could sometimes make the texts easier to read for a more recent audience, but simultaneously altered or destroyed some of the nuances of character that were actually written by Shakespeare. Let's roll through some of the significant differences and why they're so important to an actor or reader today. Capitalization. In the First Folio, words that would start with lowercase letters by modern convention are often capitalized. These capitalizations can offer a clue as to which words Shakespeare thought the character was choosing particularly carefully, and can therefore be assigned to actors as to which words should be carefully chosen. Now, some may argue that there are so many stages between Shakespeare's original writing and the publication of the First Folio, for example, the typesetting process performed by various compositors, that we can't actually infer Shakespeare's true intentions from looking at the First Folio. Other than a small part of the play to Thomas More, no manuscript exists with Shakespeare's original handwriting. However, these capitalizations and other alterations did not happen by accident. They may have been present in Shakespeare's original fair or foul papers of the plays, or perhaps added by those observing and listening to how the text was actually performed by actors at the time. But what we do know for certain is that Shakespeare himself was an actor, and therefore likely very sensitive to the verbal delivery of his words. Another major difference was spellings. Now, Elizabethan and Jacobean society was a much more verbal society. Printed work was relatively new and relatively exclusive, and the common language of the time was verbal, not written. Elizabethans and Jacobeans were far more sensitive to the sounds of words than a modern listener might be. Variations in spelling, therefore, can indicate variations in sound. Now, in a later video, I will go through specific examples of this and how we as actors or readers in the modern day can use the spellings in the First Folio to infer what might be happening with the character actually speaking these words. Now, another important difference between the First Folio and the modern texts is the rhetorical structure of the argument. Elizabethans were incredibly well schooled in constructing rhetorical arguments that appealed not just to logic and reason, but to emotion as well. Now, this rhetorical structure informs not only the matter of the argument being delivered, but the manner in which it is delivered. Punctuation plays an enormous part in delineating this structure. Now, the rhetorical structure and punctuation in the first folio text may be extremely different from the modern text. Now, in the modern text, it may have been modified to become more coherent to a reader. In the original text, it may contain valuable information about what's going on in the character, and we can therefore use that structure and punctuation from the first folio to inform us as actors and readers today. Another difference is the structure of the lines themselves. Often lines that may have been written as verse or as prose in the first folio may have been altered to be the opposite in modern text. We'll talk a lot more about verse and prose at another time. Be aware that this can be a contentious issue. Some alterations from Shakespeare's original intended line structure may have taken place during the composition of the first folio itself. Many later editors argue that the first folio's compositors may have converted to prose, converted to verse, split, combined, or otherwise changed the length of lines simply to fit them neatly on the page. Or even to fill up blank spaces left on the page due to the limitations of positioning and ordering the text within the physical layout of the actual folded sheets of paper that made up the books. More about all that in another video. Yeah, so as a result, some edits made by modern versions were quite innocently intended to correct these compositor alterations. Yeah, I did use air quotes. How did you know? Anyway, often these edits are misjudged or go too far. A lot of overzealous tweaks in the modern texts may actually have caused more harm than good by obscuring important cues for character that were present in the first folio's line structure. Perhaps the most destructive edits in the modern texts are those that have changed highly irregular looking text into a more regular form, just for the sake of neatness. Well, Shakespeare's characters are often placed in highly irregular, heightened situations, where they experience highly irregular, heightened emotions and think highly irregular, heightened thoughts. The excessive regularization of their speech can entirely erase the intended expression of the characters. Yeah, well, I think that working from the first folio can reveal a version of a character that is perhaps closer to Shakespeare's intentions than we can find in the modern texts. Yeah. Yeah, see you later. I love you too. No, you hang up. Character prefixes are the names in the margin of the text indicating who is speaking each speech. In almost all modern versions of the plays, these are standardized, so that one character will have one prefix throughout the entire script. In the first folio, that's not always the case. For example, the so-called Lady Capulet, who should not really be called Lady Capulet at all, but we'll come back to her in another video very soon. Now take, for example, Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Or is that character called Robin Goodfellow? In a modern text, it doesn't really matter. In the first folio, it very much does, because in the first folio both prefixes are used. When a character is prefixed as Puck, we see a much more mischievous, much darker, and more, well, Puckish version of the character. When the character is prefixed as Robin, we see a lighter, more benign form of the character. Now this duality is an absolute feast for an actor. In fact, the two sides of the character have two separate character arcs. Puck remains relatively consistent throughout the play and has very powerful magic all the way through. Robin Goodfellow, however, develops and becomes more powerful as the play continues. This informs a huge amount about that character, which is lost when the prefixes are standardized in modern texts, but is all there waiting for an actor or a reader in the first folio. Now, originally there were only 700 to 750 copies of the first folio printed. Now, a little over 230 of these still exist today, and some of those extant copies may in fact be cobbled together from other copies that have been cannibalized over the years to produce one copy. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit like and subscribe to this channel. It really does help me out. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or thoughts about the first folio. Exit, pursued by a bear. Exit, pursued by a what? Really, a bear? What, like a bear? That'll do, won't it? That'll do. Done. Stop recording, that's so long.